Oops. I had a slight pause there. I'll edit that pause out right at the beginning. Note to self, edit that out. Um, I don't have the fireplace going over here because the internet's down. It's actually been down now for well over 48 hours. That hurricane made its way up through here, and it's actually been spinning over central Kentucky, the remnants, and there's almost nothing of it left. But there's a lot of big trees down. There's power out through various parts of Kentucky. My internet's down over it. I did live stream last night using my phone. I didn't think the bandwidth would be enough, but it was enough, but right after live stream, it said that I'm nearly out of internet. Actually, I have unlimited internet access through my phone, but the trick of that is, this is how they get you, is that after 15 gigabytes, the speeds throttle down into really, really, really slow speeds. So that's the well, I have unlimited internet on my phone. Like, oh yeah, you do, but that's Verizon, of course. I brought out this neat little tool I use quite often. It's called a clamp meter. And by the way, this actually plays into this video very nicely. I don't want you to think I'm promoting any sort of particular tool here, although I am, but it plays into power. I've been thinking now for years on a free energy device, and I'll tell you about it here in a second. I don't know the absolute certainty of it working, but from knowing how a quote-unquote AC generator works, obviously, the stators and the whole arch form, because that's what a generator is. It's not actually generating anything. You're generating a cake if you insert like flour and sugar and all this other stuff. There's a bunch of components that go in, and they get transformed or converted into something that we call a cake, but that's not what happens in a generator. I've spoken about this quite a few times before, because there is no conversion of power when it comes to hydroelectric. Solar is completely different because light is already an energy circuit. In case of hydroelectric or falling water at a waterfall or wind power, they'll all tell you that. And I was watching the raising up of a huge wind tower for power up in Massachusetts, and they will literally say, as well everybody else, it converts, wind energy is converted into electrical energy. There's no conversion there. It's like talking about converting raw copper into pennies, right? Well, you are doing a conversion. You're taking something, kind of like all this leather goods laying around me. I got rolls of leather everywhere. I do a conversion of that and convert the leather rolls into wallets or convert it into a belt. But nobody ever talks about this in any video or any article. There's no conversion of hydro power in the case of a dam or wind power into the generation of electricity, yet they will all tell you that. Anyway, this is a line splitter. You can actually, without taking your wire apart to check the amperage, and you actually plug in whatever power tool or this lamp or this computer, and you want to see how much current it's actually using. So this goes onto the tool, and you got a ground here, and what you do is you take your clamp meter. This is a brilliant little tool. Like I said, this is a CL800 KLEIN tool. It also too comes with the leads here, so you can use it as a regular voltmeter, which I have a really nice KLEIN voltmeter. But you actually take this. Of course, there's a little Hall effect sensor right up here, which is a little integrated circuit that actually transduces the magnetic field into the electrical signal for accuracy, and it's extremely reliable and very consistent. But what you do is you plug whatever it is you want to test here and over here, and this splits it right here, and it'll do up to 15 amps. And so you turn the unit on, and just by clamping this on, you can actually read it and see what the current is. Like I said, up to 15 amps. I'd ask somebody, some guy said, I told my professor, he was in live stream, You know, about free energy, there's this guy on YouTube and says that, you know, electrons aren't flowing through power line. Well, that guy's crazy. Well, I'm not the one that said that. Nikola Tesla said that. Heaviside. Um, Charles Proteus Steinmetz, the discoverer of the principle of the so-called electron. There's no such thing as an electron. But the principle, of course, is real. And that was the discoverer, J.J. Thomson, who called it accurately 1 unit of dielectric induction. I will point out to you, even though there's a sensor, obviously the Hall effect sensor in this tip unit, you can actually see it right here. But by clamping this around here, you got plastic on plastic, and there's nothing there. You know, they're not making any contact. So it's like, well, it's measuring the magnetic field for the deduction of the amount of current, and it is really accurate. It'll tell you how much current's flowing through, you know, the computer, this lava lamp, whatever it is you want to hook it up to, your refrigerator. You see what your load is, you know, if you're over drawing the load on your house. It's like, you know, since you say that all power movement is the flow of electrons, and there's no branch of science that ever defined the term field, why don't you tell me what happens when I use this clamp meter? And you can see it's not touching, and it's all plastic all around. Yeah, I know there's actually just a wire that's split right here, this hollow spot here. The wire branches out here and over here, so you can clamp around it and determine the current, the actual draw of current on it. On this line splitter tool, it's a little $16 line splitter tool, and I'll actually have it below if you're interested in one of this. This is way, way more useful than an amp, a regular voltmeter. But this is also, too, a voltmeter. So, you know, what is it that's being measured? You know, I thought you said that power was flowing through the lines, you know, electrons. Kind of like, you know, a water line. You know, you got the water is not flowing outside the water line. You know, how could you measure it? You know, you could put your ear up to it and you could, you know, hear the water flow, but there's no water flowing out unless there's a crack in it, right? There's nothing flowing outside. They will tell you that the electrons are flowing through the wires like a water line. And that's not what's happening at all. These conductors are actually field guides, but they never defined a field. So getting into this very, very quickly, I'd like to get into discussion of the free energy device, and I'm going to try to build it. I am. If I disappear, you know that the government disappeared me for talking about what I'm fairly certain is a free energy device. And for a long time, of course, I never would have actually explored alternatives if I had a totally closed mind, and I had nearly a closed mind on the idea of free energy. You know, but understanding the nature of so-called generators and the nature of the conjugate to magnetodielectric and what electricity actually is, like, and also too, and I was laughing about this, and this has nothing to do with UFOs, okay? Just as a ignorant young person is only interested in the puppets in the puppet show, rather than the hidden guy behind there that's pulling the strings, the puppet master, everybody's fascinated. I don't care if you call them UFOs. They're just field propulsion craft, okay? That's what they are. They're field propulsion craft. They're fascinated by the fact, well, you know, it's levitating in free air, and it can go off at fast speeds, and this and that. It's like, well, you know, they'll agree that, well, it's just a field propulsion craft. Everything operates off of the right-hand rule. Now that's the puppet, the levitation, the amazing speeds, the fact that it can stop on a dime. You know, that's what fascinates people. What should fascinate them, and the real wonder behind it, is there's no type of energy you could put in there. You know, conventional, you know, not gasoline, obviously, you know, not radioactive decay power generators like we have on some of these deep space satellites. It has to be, there's no alternative. There's massive power consumption, and you couldn't load it down with enough fuel to fly more than a few minutes. You just couldn't. It's impossible. Not only that, it would be super, super impossibly heavy. The only thing that can power a field propulsion craft is a free energy device. And the thing has to be incredibly simple, incredibly lightweight, and also, too, scalable. And I could think of a few different ways to scale it, including the individual single unit itself, for greater power draw. But all it is a geometric arch form. Current AC generators, which don't generate power, they manifest power. They operate off the principle of interjection of time. You actually change the field with respect to time, and this is what Charles Proteus Steinmetz and Oliver Heaviside called churning up the ether. Churning up the ether. So is there any transformation of power or conversion of power in the case of hydroelectric or wind or on and on and on? You sit there with, you know, a crankshaft or a water wheel, all these things that are used to so-called generate power, and there's no conversion. I mean, you think wind is being converted into electricity? Well, of course not. You actually introduce a temporal component with the stator and the so-called generator, which itself is an arch form invented by Nikola Tesla, to churn up the ether. And you actually send along the conductors this power. Of course, electricity is hybrid of dielectricity and magnetism. There's a great book you could download for free. It's on archive.org. It's called Electrical Discharges, Waves, and Impulses. Printed 110 years ago by the genius Charles Proteus Steinmetz, who himself was far smarter than Nikola Tesla. Yeah, published 1914, 110 years old. Electrical Discharges, Waves, and Impulses. Where's my pendulum at here? Got some fascinating stuff in it. Anyway, I've actually expended a lot of mental energy thinking about free energy device, and there has to be more than one way to do it, obviously and logically so, but understanding the fact that you need to introduce a temporal component, no kinetic inputs for generation of power. The only thing you're trying to generate is a temporal variance to churn up the ether, which this means, and I've spoken about this endlessly in prior videos, that there is a phase disparity of 1 to phi. In other words, there is a polarization of time on any magnetic field. I didn't bring it out, but I got tons and tons of these pyramidal magnets. This is the only time you could actually say pyramid power is real, because there's actually this huge Gaussian flux at the tip of these pyramidal magnets that is extremely high flux, and you can actually palpably measure it with a Gauss meter up to 3/4 Tesla, like the ones that I have. They're 2-inch base, tapered to 2 millimeter square tips. So you actually have this huge temporal flux variance that's even greater than a conventional magnet, because it's tapered to, that's how a fireman's nozzle hose works, is it takes the pressure from the incoming hose and it constricts it and it ups the pressure. And so you actually have this magnetic flux, which is really, really high at the tip, and of course it's a permanent magnet. So there has to be, and this would be a inverse alternating south-north, 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 inverse polarity, a stator vortex array. Let me repeat that again. And I'm not trying to use fancy words. To me, these are the opposite of fancy words. A stator vortex array, like a DNA helix, a stator vortex array. So I don't know if you know what a stator is in the case of a so-called generator. But it would be a pyramidal permanent magnet Hallback array. So pyramidal magnets, 3/4 inch, tapering down to 5 millimeter tips probably, and these have to be ordered from China. These are the only people essentially actually producing magnets today. So you'd actually have this helical Hallback array of these pyramidal magnets of alternating polarity, you know, north-south, north-south, north-south. So you'd actually have a stator vortex. So to be a tubular stator vortex array, and what this would introduce into the windings around which they're introduced of this Hallback stator array of pyramidal magnets is this temporal flux between one end of the stator to the other end of the stator. Just, can you, I know you can see, you know, a vortex or a helical array, a stator rod with that array in it. It's helical. You're introducing a temporal variance. So everything ultimately is really the stator, even though that component necessitatively, of course, is the stator, and that would be a free energy device. Do you know anybody? Actually, I know a guy. His name is George Mizell. He actually orders special form magnets from China. He's on YouTube, and I've talked to him several times, and I've known him for many, many, many years. He goes on YouTube by the name of Super Magnet Man. He travels to China occasionally and looks at the creation of these special magnets. I need to talk with him about producing. They won't make magnets for you unless you order. It's like a minimum of like many thousands. You know, they just don't make molds and make a few or a few hundred. No, you have to order many, many thousands. That's the problem. So, if I disappear next week because of talking about, and I have been serious, I've expended a lot of mental energy over quite a long time thinking about how this would work. It's like, well, what's the arch-form device that we understand as the generator? How does it work? Well, you're actually taking kinetic to introduce a temporal variance to churn up the ether, in the case of a so-called AC generator. Well, to introduce a temporal variance, and that's how a magnet works. I've talked about this. It's polarized time on the North Pole and the South Pole at a phase disparity of 1 to phi. You can actually see the effect of light, kind of like redshift and blue shift. Well, if you look at any magnet underneath the supercell, and I've shown that endless times, you actually see a red shift and a blue shift on the North Pole. On the North Pole, it's a phase disparity of 1. To the South, it's phi, or 1.6 times the North Pole. On a conventional regular cube magnet, if you change the actual magnetic geometry, you can actually increase the flux. So using this stator vortex of pure metal magnets to introduce a temporal variance on the windings, nothing is moving. Nothing is moving. Yeah. There's no kinetic input. This is churning up the ether by using the phase disparity of polarized time between the North Pole and the South Pole of the magnet. I can't stand the 10 zillion videos on the tube that talk about, oh, look at this free energy device. Like, it's nonsense, or it's a gimmick, and they got a hidden electromagnet underneath the table that's making something. I can't stand that stuff. Life is way too short, you know, to pull magician's tricks and try to, you know, squirrel or fool anybody about stuff like that. So, by the way, you should check out that book. It's a free download. By the way, also too, not a free download. Is this most useful little tool I've ever had. It's a clamp meter and a voltmeter. You actually plug in the leads. They actually come with it. I've got it over here, your little positive negative probe, so it's both a clamp meter and a voltmeter. This doesn't come with it, the little line splitter, but it's only like 16 bucks. Anyway, on page 10, he makes a wonderful analogy of a pendulum. And this is getting into the electrical circuit, because electricity is not one thing. It's actually a hybrid of dielectricity and magnetism. Yeah, these two things operating as one. He actually uses, let me get this little piece of fuzz off of my pendulum here, a little nylon fuzz of a pendulum. You're talking about potential gravitational energy inertia, which of course is correspondent to the dielectric. Of course, I'm introducing, you know, a swing in this. Of course, if I stop it, then it will cycle down. That would, of course, be analogous to dissipation of the circuit. So let me keep it going. Talking about potential gravitational energy or inertia relative to the dielectric, and of course the induced energy, which is, you know, once it reaches the lowest pressure point, i.e. gravity. He's actually calling that potential energy. To actually call at height, this is stored energy. It's like, well, I've actually expended a couple calories to raise it up to that point, but if it actually starts there, when we say potential energy, we're actually talking about rest, because nature abhors the vacuum. But let me get to this. Kinetic energy, of course, is the magnetic. In other words, actually after it falls past zero, there's sufficient energy left over of the height that it started at. And of course, if I don't actually keep it swinging, you know, it's eventually going to come down to zero. So he actually talks about, in his analogy on page 10 of electrical discharges, waves, and impulses, and it's a simple thing for people to wrap their brain around, is a pendulum where we actually have the rising weight is force energy over inertia, and of course it changes back to potential energy again. However, to call that potential energy is incorrect. The current, of course, is consumed and grounded by the loss of the dielectric. This, of course, this is the lowest pressure. Other than me dropping it, this is the lowest pressure mediation right here. All kinetic energy has been expended, potential energy has been released, and this is where the pendulum seeks its rest, unless, of course, I drop it and it falls to the ground, obviously so. And Heidi's actually calling this stored energy, which I actually don't agree with, even though Steinmetz is a genius. And what are we referring to in potential energy? There is no rest or grounding inertia. Of course, we can call this ground or rest of the pendulum. But he talks about the swinging back and forth, and this actually gets into this conjugate energy between the magnetic and the dielectric, which makes up the electrical circuit. This is a fact. The electric circuit, and these are his words, and I've been talking about this for years, is the magnetic and the dielectric. Phi times psi equals Q in Planck of electrification. Eric Dollard talks about this endlessly as well. Electricity is not a thing. Electricity is a composite of this conjugate binary entity of the magnetic and the dielectric. And he's using, and it's really a pretty perfect analogy, between the potential energy and the kinetic energy of the pendulum. As it swings back and forth, it's no different than actually talking about the helical circuit of the coaxial circuit of light itself, where we actually have this interplay and exchange back and forth between the electrical and the magnetic. And of course, electricity is a hybrid of dielectricity and magnetism. And we actually have a center conductor and course of the circuit of light. And the rarefaction and compression will actually talk about manifesting and demanifesting, which unfortunately modern day science refers to that as the photon. But this back and forth exchange between the magnetic and the dielectric. But this complete circuit between the back and forth is the interplay between the magnetic and the dielectric. And this circuit, and you can see this is a cycle, right? Just like electricity has a cycle, X number of hertz. Yes, this is this conjugate interplay between this binary entity of the magnetic and the dielectric. We'd actually say the dielectric is falling towards the null point of gravity, and the kinetic energy in the system is, of course, feeding the circuit of whatever electrical conductive is fed from the power line and, of course, from the generator or the substation. But this binary interplays between the magnetic and the dielectric. There's enough of the pendulum, right? But I think that actually kind of highlights it well. You know, the kinetic energy of the system and the swing past the null point of true vertical, and that's the dielectric. And he keeps, but I don't agree with him that calling that potential energy. We could actually call it ground or rest or dielectric. We can call it a lot of different things, but that full swing is not one thing. The full swing of that pendulum is the kinetic and the rest dielectric that are operating in a cyclic rate. And that cyclic entity of the swinging back and forth of the pendulum is what ignorant human beings call the electrical circuit. But that electrical circuit is not one thing. It's those two things operating and sync with each other relative to the circuit. And of course, as far as the dielectric, that is voltage in the electrical circuit, and the magnetic is amperage or current. Magnetism is always force. Basically, nobody is hurt from voltage, i.e. the dielectric. People are hurt by amperage or magnetic. Yeah? Ground or rest is dielectric. You know, the punch, the actual power or force, or the cycle is, of course, the magnetic. Yeah, these are his words. The electrical circuit contains the magnetic and the dielectric, which makes up the electrical circuit. We say gravity or grounding or dielectric and electrostatics. I'm going to show you this little diagram in his book. First, this is what you've seen a million times in my videos. We see the two poles of the magnet. We could refer to those two holes as the dielectric portals. We could also refer to them as grounds or the rest nodes. But we could also refer to them as the conductors. And you see the exact same thing here. This is the most important diagram in the universe. Any advanced alien species would immediately understand what it is. This would be what it would look like if you cut a donut in half, a hollow donut in half. This is the circuit of the electrical circuit. This is also, too, the conjugate diagram between the magnetic and the dielectric. The broken up lines are the dielectric, and of course the midpoint is the plane of inertia. But these two black spots over here, this is also, too, the cross-section of an alternating current line. There's a reason why alternating current is best for long-distance energy propagation and not DC. It's the most simple and the best mimic of nature. So those two black spots are the conductors, like the AC power lines in your backyard. Well, this is also, too, the cross diagram of a magnet. And everybody thinks, well, a magnet just has a magnetic field. Well, this is the exact same diagram for a reason. It's the exact same diagram for a reason because the atoms that actually make up that qualitative field device that we call a magnet is dominated by the dielectric. Everybody's fascinated by the magnetic. Nobody has a clue about the dielectric. Everybody's only... Because what's fascinating, these bright yellow lines out here and the field that extends outside the magnet, which you can feel the influences on, but nobody is fascinated by the true puppet master of the show, which are those two black holes on either side right there. Yeah, well, those two black holes are no different than the AC circuit that makes up the energy circuit of electricity. And of course, once again, electricity is the hybrid of dielectricity and magnetism, those two black spots there. So what's the difference between those two black spots here in the case of AC power lines? And this is the most important diagram in the universe, not my opinion, a fact. It's the exact same two big black spots right here you can see of any magnet underneath the supercell. We could call those two black spots ground, counter space, dielectric vortex nodes, and of course the mediary line between both would be rest. Between both there is no magnetic flux. There is no magnetic flux between those two. The secret to understanding the universe, the secret to understanding free energy, is to truly understand what fields are, to truly understand the AC arch form of this so-called AC generator, which doesn't generate anything. You're introducing through kinetic input, which is not converted to and not transformed into power, a temporal component. Well, the magnetic field itself has polarized time between the North Pole and the South Pole. If you actually, my position, and I've thought endlessly about this, and I'm going to try to build it, you have an inverse, north-south, north-south, a stator of Hall-back magnets. Nothing is moving in this system. You actually have a free energy device because you are introducing a helical high temporal polarization between one end and the other end. So you actually have two temporal variables between the far end and the near end, and also two along the path. And this itself churns up the ether. That's all an AC generator does. You're introducing kinetic input to the arch form of the generator and the stator to cause the manifestation of, because they don't generate, they manifest power. And this must necessitatively be how a free energy device works. Once again, I don't care about UFOs and discussion of little green men. We'd be fascinated by the field propulsion craft, which is itself fascinating, of course. But what's really fascinating is not that field propulsion craft hovering, not burning gasoline or liquid oxygen or anything else like that. It's the field propulsion craft. What's fascinating is the free energy device that's powering that thing. Because there is no type of fuel that you or anybody on this earth can think of that you could stuff enough into a craft to power it more than a few minutes. Just, that would be it. Psst. They require enormous amounts of power. They can only run on a free energy device. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. By the way, I have this pinned below in the comments if you're interested in one of these. I love the heck out of these. Really wonderful. It's got the leads over here to use at a voltmeter. Hopefully I have my internet back this evening. This hurricane has kind of wreaked havoc on a lot of stuff in Kentucky. You wouldn't think so considering it's 1,000 miles away. Not as the bird flies, but still. Nevertheless, thank you so much for watching. Everyone to contact me, my information is in the link below. Any donation is always very warmly welcome. Lux Veritas. Okay?